Previously on Historical Geocaching, my uncle and I are visiting the USS Hornet in Alameda, California. Most recently, our tour guide has taken us up to the island.
CIC. This is Combat Information Center. This is where the battle would be followed from. Over in that area over there is where the air radar would be. These areas here would be surface, and then this area over here would be sub. So they would track everything that would be close by. And interesting thing, all these boards here that are forward, the guys behind them would be writing backwards on the boards. So you had to be able to write backwards to be somebody that was doing data on these boards. Are the kids, what are the kids doing? Just stand there or sit there. Okay.
Ring for red. Ring for black?
There.
Oh, okay, there we go.
There. This is the way it would be, and there'd be probably up to 40 men in here overseeing everything that was going on in the air, on the surface, and under the water. And again, you've got the Dead Reckoning tracers. You've got the skunk board over here where they would be keeping track of the squadrons that were out. So this would be a very busy place, and it would be in communication with the bridge where the captain was. So there'd be a lot of things that would be going on in here at this particular time. So when they were at sea, the captain spent all of his time on the bridge. He was in charge. He was up here 24 hours a day. He has more luxurious accommodations down below next to the hangar deck, but when they were operational, he was up here all the time. So he was in charge. He was responsible. So these are his at-sea quarters here, and he had a bathroom, a bunk. They would bring his meals to him, and this is where he would spend all his time. So you had a navigator here, and this is how they would control or communicate with the engine room. So this is the engine order telegraph. What this did was communicate with the engine room. So they would turn this handle down to whatever speed they wanted to go at, which was determined by the captain, and they would get a response. The bell would ring in the engine room. That meant that they needed to change speed or do something. So what would happen is this pointer here would point on what speed they wanted to go. There's a secondary pointer. Let's see it here. Secondary pointer would be controlled by the engine room. So that meant that the engine room would move their handle. It would come up and match what the bridge handle was, so that they were sure that they got the order down and they were going at the same speed. Now, when they were doing underway replenishments, now an aircraft carrier could only be out to sea for 3 or 4 days before they would have to resupply the carrier. So they had a bunch of supply ships that would come up next to the carrier, and they would hook up and they would transfer supplies, mail, food, fuel, whatever was required for them to continue. They would get it from a supply ship. Well, what that meant was that if they were going the standard speeds, and each one of these standard speeds relates to an RPM of the engine turning. Well, if for some reason they weren't able to maintain the speed of the supply ship, they had an RPM meter right here, and it would be the same way. They dial in the number here, and then the engine room would dial it in to match what the orders were, and they could determine what speed they needed to go at. So what would happen is the captain would be sitting up here in that chair, and he would determine whether the ship next to him was going faster or slower, and then he would order to either speed up or slow down by using the RPM meter here. The navigator, the helmsman here, would be the one driving the ship, and he had to be very aware of what was going on, and it was a unique talent for a navigator because the way that they would be able to control the ship was they'd have to feel it throughout their body. So they'd be able to stand here and they could feel what the ship was doing to maintain a straight course, because if the captain looked out and saw this thing doing this, the navigator was not doing his job. So, and it was a fairly intense position to be in because the navigator had to make sure that the ship was going straight ahead in a straight line. He'd have the rudder position here, he's got the compass, he's got a tube here where he could talk down into the engine room. This would control the rudder. Let's see, these are the emergency brakes. No? Don't think so. Those are whistle for activating the whistles. This is a hardened facility. That meant that these walls are hardened steel. During battle stations, there's covers like this that they would put up. This is on the outside, and I'll show it to you when we get up there. It's a hardened cover that protects this compartment. The captain would be able to communicate with any location on the ship from here. Let's see. The navigator would be over here. Anytime there was a change of course, he would have to make a note of it. So he would keep a log of a change of course from the captain. So with them manufacturing 24 of these ships, and they were operational for 30 years, there's a warehouse somewhere that has miles and miles of charts and navigational records, and also every plane that landed or took off, there's a photograph, there's a movie of it. So there's 8mm film somewhere also that who knows where and what the warehouse is or whatever.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Out here, nobody was allowed to sit in the captain's chair, but you can now. After the war, this used to be open. There was no ceiling here during World War II. You remember that?
I didn't spend any time here.
Oh, okay.
I had to paint lots of it.
So, this was open during World War II, and the reason for it being open is because the planes flew slower, they could see the bombs coming in, they could see the planes coming in, so the captains, were more aware of what was going on. Well, after the war, they decided that with one of the upgrades in the early 50s, that they were going to enclose the bridge. Well, all of the captains got together, and it was a big problem because they didn't want their bridge enclosed because they weren't going to be aware of what was going on. So they came up with a compromise, and they put these panels in, but these panels can be removed. So the captain said, okay, if we can remove the panels, we'll put them in. Well, of course, once they were installed, they were never removed, but that was the philosophy at the time, was to be able to see, and then since the jets got faster and they weren't able to be aware of what was going on, and radar took over and everything was enclosed like this. So when the task force went out, there was probably 50 ships involved. It wasn't just an aircraft carrier going out. Here's a picture of a task force that would go out with the carrier in the middle, and then the destroyers, and then the destroyer escorts, and then the submarines at each corner, and it was 50 to 100 miles across with that number of ships. So it wasn't something just that the aircraft carriers would go out by themselves. They had a whole flotilla of other ships that would protect them.
Well, thank you everyone so much for watching this video of me and my uncle exploring the USS Hornet museum ship here in Alameda, California. It was a lot of fun to see all these cool old planes, to be on the ship where Apollo 11 and 12 were recovered, to learn a little bit more space history. Just a lot of fun. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this sort of stuff, please consider subscribing, because each and every week I post new videos. I know you wouldn't want to miss out on any of that. Until next time, this is History Buff TN Photobug signing out, and I am indeed having a blast with the past.